Hi everybody, it's Dr. Jensen. We're going to practice recoding together like we talked about in the example. So again, the more practice you get, the better off you are. So it really pays off to practice and click together. In a video, it's a little easier because you can always stop me and rewind me and go back and, kind of review what I just did if you lose track. Because I admit, it is hard to kind of follow someone click by click through a video and be looking at a video and looking at your screen on what you're doing in software at the same time. So just go about this at your own pace that makes sense for you. Okay, so I'm already in SPSS. If you go into the research drive in apps.ufl.edu, you open SPSS as you're used to doing, and then of course go to open, and then you'll navigate to your file. So you go, here's the top, all the way down to that famous R drive, the research drive. We're going to go into courses, and then our course, which is fall, and data, and there's your data sets that you've been working on. We're going to use Heroin Recode 1 as the data set we're going to open. Now I'm already open in the data set, so I'm going to cancel, but you can hit open. So once you get the data set open, we can start working on a recode. Now remember, any new variable we make appears at the very bottom of the variable view screen. So previously there were only 8101 variables, now there's 8102. So I just made this variable for practice purposes, past year drug use. Okay, so again, the steps of recoding, we're going to first determine why we need a recode. We know we want to set aside the heroin users, so that's a valid reason. We're going to make a dummy variable. But then we want to familiarize ourselves with the variables. So we want to make sure we run a frequency, so use your descriptive statistics command, or you can use the analyze menu, either way, and start looking at this variable that we're going to analyze. So this is when we familiarize ourselves with what's in there, so we know what we're doing. Now remember, reading a frequency, the leftmost column is the response, and the column next door is the count, or number of people that gave that response. Percent is the proportion of people that gave it, and then valid percent includes all the valid responses. It does not include the missing data, this 1084. Okay, and then the cumulative percent just kind of adds these proportions as you go. Okay, so we have 2,350 marijuana users, 858 meth users, 668 cocaine users, 592 alcohol users, and 952 heroin users, for a total of 5,420 offenders that are getting us their drug used most often in the past year. We do have offenders, 1,084, that did not provide that to us. In this case, it would be that they were not a drug offender, they weren't using drugs, they committed some other offense. Okay, but that's our data. So again, you always familiarize yourself with data. You never analyze what you don't know. So another thing we need to do is check the value labels. Okay, so we go, oh, okay, a response of marijuana would be a 1. Meth is a 2, cocaine 3, alcohol 4, and heroin 5. So again, just familiarizing yourself with what's there. You'd also want to read code books, look at surveys, talk to database analysts, and determine how this data works, what made it, how it got there, so you are fully familiar with what's here before you start messing with it. Okay? So now that we're familiar with all of this, we're going to make our plan. So we're going to go back into our little Word document. We jotted down what the value labels are. This is a very common step that students will do. You can do this in a notebook or on a document. Okay, so we know what all the current little number values assigned to everything is. Now we're going to actually make our coding scheme, or our plan of how we're going to change them. So we always go left to right, the old value on one side and the new value on another. So the old value of 1, which is marijuana, we're going to change by virtue of the arrow to a new value of 0. Okay, the old value of 2, which is meth, we're going to change also to a 0. Cocaine is 3, we're also going to change to a 0. Alcohol is 4, we'll change to a 0. And then 5 is heroin, that's what we want. We're going to change that to a 1. So again, this is typical dummy coding scheme type stuff. We use this across all statistics, all sciences, very typical. Remember, absence of the thing we want, presence of the thing we want. So this is again that example using the snowball dance. You guys over here and you guys over here. We're kind of setting everybody aside. So if we know people in each group and how they're organized, we can test for differences between those groups, and that's what we want to do. Okay? So the very last thing in our scheme that you will always have is how to handle the missing data. So the rule of thumb is if the data was missing in the old values or the original variable, then I still want it to be missing in the new one. Okay, there are very few exceptions to that. Sometimes we use the missing data to tell us something about the respondent or the record, but in this case, and in most cases, we are not. So basically, if we had an I don't know response or a blank response, we still want it to be missing because we still can't analyze it in the new variable. Okay, so you might see some commands once we get into SPSS that say system or user missing. That's a good kind of catch-all command for handling missing data. So system missing data basically means it was defined by the system or set aside or marked that way. And it's kind of predetermined. User missing data often handles blanks and kind of data that isn't there, it wasn't given. Okay, so if you select both, you kind of cover both. Okay, so whether it was defined by the system or not provided by a user, you're going to make sure it doesn't get included in the values of the new variable, because we can't analyze a skip or a blank or an I don't know. It doesn't tell us anything. All right, so now that we have our plan, we're going to go recode. So let's get back into SPSS. Okay, again, just to familiarize yourself with the variable, you can run the frequency. So we'll go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, and then Frequencies. Again, it's going to remember the last frequency you asked for. Okay, or you can just scroll down to the bottom of the list because that's where the new variable is that we're working with. We click OK. Again, there's our frequency. We're going to use this again in the future, so you can just hang on to that for now. But now we're ready to recode. So we go back into SPSS, go to the Transform menu, and select Recode into different variables. Never, ever, ever recode into same variables. Okay? There are almost no times where you want to do that. So recode into different and recode into same. This is the difference between save and save as, right? We talked about this before. Recode into same means you're going to overwrite the variable that you're messing with. So if you make a mistake and you do recode into same, you have now corrupted the data with your mistake. So you no longer have an original variable to work with should you mess up. So we always recode into different so we can keep that original variable intact and check it with the new stuff we're going to make or the changes we're going to do. And it doesn't matter if we add a new row of data here, okay? We know what it's called, we know how it's organized, and it lets us keep the original should we need to use it for something else, or we make a mistake, we need to go back to the original and then fix it. Okay, so always recode into different. You're brought into this menu. First, SPSS asks you, which variable do you want? So you go, okay, I need to go pick the past year drug use variable. So you scroll down to the bottom, pop that in the queue. It says, okay, what do you want to recode this into? So at this point, you give it a name. You can name it past year drug use recoded if you want to. That's kind of a typical way to name something. Or you can name it what it's actually going to represent, like heroin users. Might be more meaningful to you. Now notice when I type this in, I put an underscore between heroin and users. Okay, remember in the variable name you cannot use spaces. A space means the beginning of a new variable or command. So if you want to put multiple words in a name, you have to use an underscore. For the label, I can use spaces. So I can put heroin users compared to all users. I can put as much detail as I want. I get lots of characters in there. Okay, so we've defined our name. Now we're going to go ahead and hit old and new values, which is here in the middle of the screen. Now we're going to get back to that coding scheme we were talking about. So this is where it's easy to see lots of different commands and get a little bit lost. So this is where we come back to our plan and go, okay, so this is the old value, this is the new value, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, 0, 5, 1, missing. Okay, so that's why, again, it's very helpful to go back to your scheme. So the old value, right, you see that here in the top, old value of 1, new value of 0. As soon as I define those, you notice the add button becomes illuminated. Go ahead and click that. So we're actually making our little plan inside this queue. Old value of 2, we're going to make a 0. Hit add. Old value of 3, we're going to make a 0. Also hit add. Old value of 4, we're going to make a 0. Until we get to 5. 5, we're going to turn into a 1. You notice it's building all these things. And then here is where we decide system or user missing. We're going to define that as system missing. Okay, so we're going to click those radio dials there and add that on. We're going to check our scheme. Everything looks good. We can edit anything we need to. We can change or remove stuff that we shouldn't have done. but this looks really good. So we're going to click continue. Okay, and now we've defined those values. Now we're going to hit change. Make the change, SPSS, which basically just copies your new name in there, and then click OK. Now once that's done, all you really see here in your output is a bunch of script. You're like, what the heck is this? This is syntax, okay? This is just the commands that you ran in the details, okay? And you can kind of start to read this a little bit. It's kind of like HTML code, sort of, okay? But you go, okay, well, where's my new variable? All this is just what you did in SPSS. If we want to look at the new variable, go back into your variable view, and you'll notice that the very next line now has your new variable at the bottom of your data set. So scroll all the way down. It's the latest variable made, heroin users or whatever you named it, and it's there. Now one other thing we need to do is you notice here in the values column it says none. Okay, so we need to make little value labels like the other variable had. So go ahead and click on that blue box kind of at the edge of the column, and this is where we can type in definitions. So remember, our new variable only has zeros and ones, doesn't have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going to define it the way we coded it. Value of 1, we're going to call heroin user. Add. Value of 0, we can say non-heroin user. Hit add. Again, you can use spaces and dashes and stuff inside these labels. So now we've just told SPSS what zeros and ones actually mean. Click OK. So we've labeled everything. Now we're ready to go check out our new variable. So go ahead and go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, and Frequencies. And there's our old variable. We're going to keep that in there for now because we want to actually compare with the new thing we made. So scroll all the way down to the bottom. Here's your new variable. Occasionally when we're working really fast, you might not find your new one in the list. You just have to hit this reset button, and then it'll kind of repopulate the list and refresh it. So occasionally you may have to do that just to get this updated. Go ahead and add that to the queue. You can add multiple things in here, and it's kind of convenient that these two are going to be side by side. Okay, so click OK. Now we see the old variable, whoops, past year drug used most often, and we see our new variable, heroin users compared to all others. Now we should see some things that will help us know if we did this right. So now we're going to check the variable. This is the very last step, running frequencies with the old variable and the new one to make sure they're right. Okay, so basically, if all we're doing is relabeling and rearranging things, then we shouldn't have too many differences between the old one and the new one. So if I had 952 heroin users in the old variable, I should still have 952 in the new variable. Okay, I shouldn't get new heroin users just because I'm recoding. Okay, and then basically all the other users, the 2,350 marijuana users, the 858 meth users, 668 cocaine users, and 592 alcohol users should all sum up to equal 4,468. Again, we can check that too on the calculator and make sure that that all gets combined, added together. In fact, it does. And then our total is the same, 5,420, so we know we did it right. We still have the same amount of missing data. So you're like, okay, well, this is cute and everything, Dr. Jensen, but why the heck did we do that? What this does is it shoves everybody over here versus everybody over here so we can make a different kind of comparison using statistics. So that way we can check for heroin user differences compared to non-heroin user differences in a way that kind of lets us see if there is a difference for people that use heroin versus everybody else. So this is what a typical dummy variable looks like. Okay, we're going to let this variable be a stand-in for those that use heroin versus those that don't. So actually collapsing all those answer choices into the non-heroin user lets us check for those differences. It has to happen like that because that's how statistics works. But basically you just completed your first recode and hopefully you did it correctly. If you get numbers between the old and the new variable that are different, that's when you have to kind of go back and troubleshoot a little bit and figure out maybe what you did wrong. And you may have to start over and go back and try the recode again. If, for example, you messed up and you want to get rid of this old variable, you can simply kind of highlight it and then right click and say clear. Okay, and that'll delete all that work and you go, okay, let's start over. Let's start from scratch. That's all you would need to do to get rid of stuff that's garbage that you need to purge. All right, happy recoding.